Hello. Good morning. Welcome to the NFLementary podcast, where for the first time in weeks, I can hear myself through my headphones.
That's nice.
I know, it's quite nice.
We can all hear ourselves.
Well, Mark can't hear himself.
No, because Mark's not here.
Mark's not here yet. He's late. Disgraceful. I've never been late. Well, no, I was late on Tuesday, technically, but that was due to university commitments. We've also just done our first ever successful transition from the new Studio Blue in URY.
You're
if you haven't heard of
radiant with pride.
I know, I can't believe I did it. Woohoo. But anyway.
You can put that on your CV now.
Yeah, I know. I transitioned from blue to red.
Yeah.
Like a Pokemon player.
I never played Pokemon, so I don't get that reference.
There was
Sorry.
Pokemon Blue and Pokemon Red.
Okay.
Like the old school Pokemons.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, interesting show lined up today, isn't it?
Yeah.
As always.
Well, yeah.
As
I was
always.
going to say, like, you say that as if it's a regular occurrence.
Typically Fridays are our preview show where we look at the weekend's action, but this weekend's the Pro Bowl and ain't nobody want to be previewing that.
The only thing I want to talk about with reference to the Pro Bowl is this hilarious Jamal Adams stuff.
Yeah. No, we do have to mention that actually. It's basically going to be a big old. Do you remember Newsround on the telly when we were younger?
No, because I didn't
Really?
watch the news when I was younger.
It was like on CBBC.
Oh God, I never watched that.
Oh,
No.
It was a cracking. I really enjoyed it. We're basically doing a news round today, but it's not only 5 minutes, it's going to be an hour. We're all the news over Christmas and over the last couple of weeks that we haven't been able to talk about because there's been more important things to talk about. We're going to talk about them today. And there's quite a lot of news. Coaching changes, player dramas, player divas, the NFL UK games, big shout out.
Yeah.
We've got a lot to say about them.
We're trying to drag this out as much as we can until Mark actually arrives.
Yeah, but it's all right. Yeah, interesting show lined up. I'm going to fade that down. But the first thing we need to do today is give a very special welcome to Max, because Max has achieved something, and I'm very proud of him, and I think it should be immortalised on radio forever.
I don't know what I've done.
Max, congratulations on your master's application being successful.
Okay, I thought it had something to do with like radio or football.
We're all very proud of you here on NFLementary.
Thank you.
And I'm sure all our listeners are too. If you want to send a message of congratulations into Max, hit us up on the website, uoy.org.uk. If you still use a phone, old school, drop us a text, 07851 101313. That's 07851 101313.
That guy's on his phone out there. He's probably messaging him right now.
Yeah, he must be.
Yeah.
Oh, congratulations, Max. Yeah.
There you go, see?
Everyone listens to us. I love reading out the text number because nothing makes me feel more like a legitimate radio presenter than giving people a number that they can call. And the number to call is 07851 101313.
Hey, see, you know it.
Yeah. Well, kind of. I did have to check.
Well.
Should we just get cracking?
Yeah.
I want to call this the Congrats Max episode, or Congrats.
Wow.
I just came up with that now.
That sounds like a cement company or something. Like
Congrats.
oh no, there's a company near where I live called Cemex. Same thing. Anyway.
We digress. Should we talk about coaches first?
Yeah. Well, coaches have kind of dominated the
blank air time
postseason. Yeah, definitely.
There's been a lot of changes. There's not normally this many changes.
No, I can't think of a time where there's been so many big changes.
It's been a scramble essentially to find the right coach for you.
In a weird kind of way, it's almost like, in some respects, coaches are just realigned. Like, they're still there, they're just different people, which makes no sense.
It's like Green Bay.
There's Mark, there he is.
Is he coming?
Yeah.
He's running.
Yeah.
The boy is running.
He's literally running.
He is literally running and waving at us.
Okay.
I reckon we just leave the door and don't answer it for a while.
I think so.
Or I wonder if those people next door will answer it for us.
Oh, I'll go answer it.
Oh, Max is going to answer it. I'll keep talking. Yeah, so it feels like with the coaching changes... someone else is answering it. He's back. It feels like with the coaching changes, Green Bay hired LaFleur. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
Good morning.
I've put your fader up because I'm not Max.
You put my what up?
I've put your fader up.
Oh.
It was a reference to Max getting them wrong the other day. It's okay. We know you're a bit slow on the uptake this morning.
I am.
And your clock must be slow as well, boy. Any excuses you want to read out on air? Any apologies you want to read out on air?
Yeah, well, I'll read out an apology, you know. I was very tired. I went to sleep. And do you know what? It's my fault. I didn't get moving as soon as my alarm got going.
What time did you set your alarm?
I set it for 8, so...
wow, that really is no
I fell
excuse.
asleep, like, after the alarm.
What time did you go to bed?
Probably about 3.
Yeah, it was an early night.
Yeah. 5 hours sleep.
For me, it was an early night. It was just,
You're a bit like an owl.
Oh,
Yeah, you're nocturnal and wise.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's quite a compliment.
Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with that.
Yeah. You missed our successful transition from Studio Blue into Studio Red.
Whoa, how did that work?
It actually worked out okay, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know what.
As long as we are broadcasting.
Yeah. If we're not broadcasting, let us know.
Yeah, this is when it starts broadcasting now, and that people just don't pick
I have
up
no
in
clue
late.
what's going on. And also, this episode is called I'll recap for Mark, and also for any listeners who just joined us. This is the Congrats episode, Congrats Max episode, based on his successful Masters application.
Yeah.
Shall I play the fanfare again?
Oh God, here
I'll
we
do
go.
the applause at least. Oh, stop it, guys! Guys, out the studio! We're doing a show. Come on! Oh, it's so inconvenient when they bust in the door like that.
Oh, yes.
Anyway, you didn't miss much in terms of substantive NFL content, so don't panic. We were just about to start talking about coaching changes and how it was a mad scramble.
Yeah.
There's a couple different ways we could do this. We could just recap them. We did go through them all 2 weeks ago, was it?
Yeah, just very
Feels
briefly.
like a lot longer than that. So if you want us to just read out all the names, let us know. But otherwise, we'll advance on the assumption that people know what the coach changes are. And I think an interesting way to do this would be who won the coaching roulette.
Well, I know who won.
Yes.
For once in my life,
You can say the Bucs
I can
won.
say that my team won.
Yeah.
Look,
Bucs signing Bruce Arians as head coach, Todd Bowles as their defensive coordinator, and Byron Leftwich as their offensive coordinator.
Basically, anyone that's worked with Arians in the past and had success with in the past with Arians is basically on board now, which is great. It's hard, I think, to sort of get too excited about coaching changes because ultimately you don't know what a coach will bring. Sometimes you get a minnow coach that's never really done anything before and he turns out to be great. Other times you get a great coach that comes in, doesn't really do much.
Yeah. Hello, Ron.
But for Tampa anyway, to me, and I think it seems to be a bit of the same. It is a bit of a consensus on Twitter. This is probably the most professional and on paper the most ready coaching staff we've had since before we won the Super Bowl, which is kind of weird to think of it that way, but most people would say that actually our Super Bowl team was built by Dungy anyway. It's on paper we have gone from one of the weakest no-name coaching staff in the whole league to now being a coaching staff that actually already has cohesion because they've worked together in Arizona, except Todd Bowles. But Todd Bowles is a very long-time friend of Arians and a very, very well-respected defensive coordinator. Arians has worked with Roethlisberger, Manning, Luck. He's kind of been there and done it plenty of times before. I think for me now, it is just purely execution. But already they've done all the right things.
I think it's interesting that you said it's difficult to get excited about coaching changes or something like that, because I actually interestingly think that a coaching change can be the biggest shift in momentum for a franchise, because you're not just. It's similar to drafting your franchise quarterback or something like that, and arguably even more significant because let's just take my team because obviously I'm very well acquainted with them. I am very apathetic about the future of this team at times because obviously Cam's just had surgery. We're not sure how that will turn out. The defense is old and aging, yada, yada, yada. Thomas Davis is gone. Other legends are kind of... Julius Peppers is likely going to retire. Or if he comes back for a season, he probably shouldn't because he's a bit too old. But anyway. But if the Panthers went out and hired... If the Panthers went out and hired Bruce Arians, honestly, that would be... I think I might have a heart attack and die because that's such a monumental change.
The thing is, though, is from this franchise's perspective, we had Gruden, which worked out first year, then faded away. Really and then, we brought in Raheem Morris, and that was a bit, don't really want to talk about that. Greg Schiano came in because we thought, well, let's change things up and bring a guy straight from college. Well, that didn't work out, Arizona. And then we brought in Lovie Smith, which was, this is great. This is a guy who's had success. He's a great defensive mind. He's been to the Super Bowl, And then we sack him after 2 years because... It didn't work out because he had 2 years. 1 year, by the way, with the quarterback that they drafted. The quarterback they didn't want to draft. So,
what's his name?
No, he didn't want to draft Jameis.
Oh.
He didn't want to draft Jameis.
Interesting. What, he wanted Mariota?
I don't know if he wanted Mariota.
He just didn't
but
want a
he just
quarterback.
didn't want. No, he apparently didn't want Jameis, which
Wanted to
is
play McCoy at quarterback.
pretty difficult when your head coach doesn't want the guy that you're drafting number one
Yeah.
overall. But so I think
Jameis was drafted number 1 overall.
Yeah.
and Mariota,
And Mariota number 2 overall.
Jameis is
Whoa.
still 24, by the way. Like, there's still plenty of time to go. And by the way, Arians does know Jameis Winston. He used to Winston trained under Arians when he was a lot younger.
If anyone is going to make Winston a top 10 quarterback, it's going to be Bruce Arians.
Yeah.
I know that. You know the phrase quarterback whisperer, and that gets like thrown around the league a stupid amount to people like Bill O'Brien, who just aren't quarterback whisperers but have worked with Tom Brady for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Bruce Arians is a quarterback whisperer. What he squeezed out of Carson Palmer when actually Carson Palmer had no right to be playing that well for the Cardinals, and no right to be essentially, second or third place in MVP voting in 2015.
Okay, I'll go with that. I was going to say Carson Palmer, I think, was always a good quarterback.
Yeah, but like he elevated him to a level beyond anything I think he played in the first 10, 15 years. And basically took his game to another level when actually his game should have been slowly winding down.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And also Arians is the guy for that Tampa offense. I know Deshaun Jackson was wanting to leave. I hope to God for your sake that Arians figures out some way to keep him, because if you can keep that deep threat with Jackson, and you've got Evans and you've got Godwin and you've got Humphreys and you've got OJ Howard and you've got Cameron Brate, all these weapons, Bruce Arians can just sit there, scheme his massive long distance passing game, and you're just going to torch teams.
The only
them.
thing is our free agency doesn't bode well for us. So we have Jackson for another year, but Jackson doesn't necessarily want to stay. Humphreys is an unrestricted free agent, which means we have to pay him what he wants paying, otherwise
true.
He's gone.
And he's going to he'll get good wide receiver 2 money.
Honestly, Deshaun Jackson is 32 now? I get he's a big deep threat and everything,
Humphreys?
but I'd rather say trade him, get picks, re-sign Humphreys, who's young. Godwin is young and proven to be a pretty decent deep threat when put in that position. You've got Evans, you just paid him, and he's only 25, 26. Justin Watson was drafted last year.
I think Godwin could replace Jackson. And I also think I know you recently re-signed Cameron Brate, but Brate's effectiveness last year was basically limited to the red zone. And I think in Adam Humphreys, you've got that kind of shifty Edelman, Amendola type receiver who can get open in the red zone.
I've always seen him that way, but I've seen him as an underappreciated talent on the roster because he's not usually featured as much.
Yeah, I can't underappreciate him the way he's torched us this year in the 2 games.
He did well.
Yeah,
did us proud.
Mark, what do you think?
What do I think? Well, I just think it's interesting that you're getting... I may not see things because I tend to just look at the plays and be like, whoa, rather than like looking all into like the coaching. I haven't played Madden, so I don't really understand it as much. But I don't see why you're getting really sort of excited about a whole coaching team that seems to have come from the Arizona Cardinals.
Whoa, shots fired by the Rams fan. NFC West, pop it off.
But yeah, being
a very successful Cardinals team.
The best Cardinals
the most
team.
Successful Cardinals team of all time.
Maybe I have short-term memory, but I never remember the Cardinals.
Cardinals got to the NFC Championship game in 2015, beaten by the greatest.
2015?
Yeah, beaten by the greatest team of all time.
The 2015 Carolina Panthers.
Damn straight.
Oh,
didn't just beat them, we whooped them.
No, I get what you're saying. I do, but
I think Arians...
this coaching team has cohesion because they've worked together for a few years now, and they took a team full of a weird combination of veterans like Palmer, Fitzgerald, even back then, guys who should be winding down. Then younger guys, say like Patrick Peterson, David Johnson, Chandler Jones, who, by the way, was deemed not good enough by Belichick.
Yeah.
And then they brought him into Arizona.
The NFL leader in sacks.
Yeah.
Well, was the NFL leader in sacks?
Yes. So
year before this.
I think they have.
It's also
I get what you're saying. They didn't necessarily win a Super Bowl. They didn't do that. It's the same with Todd Bowles. What did he do in New York to make you think, well, this is going to work? I think it's pure ability to do what you can do with the talent that you have. The problem that they're going to have is they are in a division right now where in the next 2 years you could see all 4 teams winning it. Never mind who's going on in the rest of the conference too.
I think Panthers now become the weakest team in the division. Honestly, I've got to say that. Saints have the pedigree, and Saints are just the best team in the division.
As long
Falcons,
as Breeze keeps playing as he does, then
Falcons are the most exciting team on the on paper. Bucks now have the best coaching staff and probably the most exciting offense. We have Cam, basically, and that's the only thing I think, and maybe McCaffrey, and they're the two things, and Kuechly. We have individual players, nothing kind of like a team identity or something that can push the entire team, and as we've seen this year, 3 players doesn't win you that many games anymore. And what I will say as well about Arians is when in his last year with the Cardinals, was it they went like 7-9 or
7-8-1?
7-8-1, yeah. And for a large amount of that season, Carson Palmer was out, and he somehow managed to make Blaine Gabbert look like a serviceable starting quarterback. And I can't remember who the other not so good quarterback that he managed to get a couple games out of.
Drew Stanton.
Yeah, Drew Stanton. And also this was all without David Johnson.
Yeah.
John Brown was injured for most of the year. He knows how to work with what he's got. And also, like, I think it's quite telling that he left and Wilkes came in, who I don't think is a bad coach, and I think will be a good head coach one day. And that team went 2-14 despite having Josh Rosen at quarterback.
Yeah.
And arguably reinforcing their offensive line more, which I think is the biggest need for the Cardinals in this draft. This offseason, I don't necessarily want this to turn into a Cardinals podcast.
I think the other thing that makes me happy as well is we didn't go down the route of young guy. We went down the route of someone who has a pedigree of winning, because that's all he's done. You know, when he took over Indianapolis, when Chuck Pagano went down with, his illness, he won, and then he won Coach of the Year. Before that, he's with Pittsburgh, and they won Super Bowls there,
winners,
So he knows, and so I have the faith in him. Jason Light, our GM, knows him too, which is how he got this deal done. It feels like the stars have aligned, and if anything is going to work, this is it.
Yeah. The other thing about Arians, which is really interesting, I watched the All or Nothing TV show about the Arizona Cardinals, really interesting. And they did an interview with him at one point, and basically he said, I don't know how old he is, he's well into his 60s, I think.
Yeah, he's about 67 or something.
He spent about 30 to 40 years just kind of doing the rounds of the NFL, being different kinds of position coaches or assistant coaches and all this kind of stuff, and no one ever gave him a shot. And he didn't get his shot until Chuck Pagano got cancer in Indianapolis, and he was finally able to kind of gain some measure of power over that team and show what a great coach he is. So even though he's, however old he is, pushing 70, in terms of head coaching experience and all that kind of stuff, he's still got that fresh motivation. He hasn't seen it all before. This is only his second real team that he'll have proper control over. So it's not as if he's going to be lacking in motivation or inspiration or anything like that. So I think, that is a great hire. But what I would counter is the Browns. Not the Browns, the Broncos.
Freddie Kitchens, pedigree of winning.
I do think the Browns have hired a really interesting trio. Kitchens, Monken and Wilkes. Their two coordinators were getting looks at head coaching jobs. Wilkes obviously was a head coach last year, formerly
everyone does
defensive
now.
Coordinator with the Panthers, and Monken, people were thinking about him as a head coach, but no one really went for it. And then Kitchens, I feel like Kitchens has been hired because of his relationship with Baker, which is good on the one hand because Baker is your future and Baker essentially is your franchise at this stage. Yeah. But then on the other foot, we have the Dirk Kotter experiment in Tampa, where Kotter was arguably promoted firstly to offensive coordinator and then to...
The crazy thing is, though, is
head coach.
Kitchens had never been an offensive coordinator before this year, and he wasn't at the beginning of the year. He was only as an interim. And so the interim offensive coordinator in his first coordinator job then becomes the head coach. I don't know.
People have been talking about it's good for Baker because he has consistency, blah, blah, blah. I'm not being funny, but he's only been there for a year. He's only been starting for half a year.
Yeah, and I'm not being funny. You're making it sound like Baker Mayfield's a 5-year-old kid that needs consistency in his life. Like, no.
What do you think?
Well, I think it's a very bold decision. I think in the NFL, especially with the start of a player's career, although the start is usually make or break, if you're bold with it, you can potentially sort of get something explosive in the sort of first years of a quarterback's life. If you look at, like, the example I know well, Jared Goff, like, he had what is arguably, although... Arguably. Oh, my tongue's a bit slow. I'll blame it on that. It's not quite woken up yet.
Brilliant.
We've spoken before about how sort of Sean McVay has a lot of heritage in the NFL, but he's still, I'd argue, is a young and exciting coach. For sure. And we've seen how that's worked with Jared Goff, and at times made Jared Goff look actually really good. when
emphasis on look really good.
Even when you argue that like he's not incredible, he's just sort of made to look good by the scheme. So with someone like Baker Mayfield, we saw what the Browns did at the end of last season with Kitchens. Is it Kitchens?
Yeah, Freddie Kitchens.
And so going into this sort of next season, they almost carry that momentum over, even if it was sort of an interim thing. It was an interim thing that worked.
The argument is, why didn't they keep Greg Williams as their head coach?
Because
he's toxic.
I won't go that far. I just think,
I would.
Look, yeah, okay, they went 5-3 in the interim period, but actually the defense wasn't that good. So you can't say, well, the defense was playing so well under him, you have to keep him. No, it wasn't. And yeah, they went 5-3, which is astonishing for the Browns. But I suppose I trust John Dorsey because his decisions are always unconventional and they always work out. And the Browns as a franchise are unconventional. So you kind of already have that sort of inherent sort of mindset when you're Cleveland, like, it can't get worse. So, build it back up with something that maybe no one else would see coming. Freddie Kitchens...
No one saw coming.
Like, no one genuinely thought that taking Baker Mayfield at 1 would be a good idea, even if you thought they would anyway.
I still rate they should have gone Saquon 1, at 4 gone Mayfield.
If Mayfield was there, which I don't think he would have been.
No, so you cannot take a running back at number 1 overall. It was bad enough to take him number 2 overall.
Imagine that combo, though.
Yeah, but imagine how much you're paying a running back. Oh, I just can't. I still don't think the Giants should have taken Saquon at 2, but anyway. Well, they definitely shouldn't have. I've proved this year. Why would you take a running back at 2? Because it's the last piece in the puzzle. But yada yada yada. Win now. Yada yada yada.
Yeah, but when you put Dwayne Haskins into that team, you're gonna have Dwayne Haskins, Saquon Barkley, Odell Beckham Jr., Evan
should
Engram.
Be a 2nd or 3rd round pick. I think there's no 1st round.
Josh Allen should have been a 2nd or 3rd round pick, and look what he does.
Josh Allen should have gone number 1 overall. Josh Allen's my favourite player.
He is quite cool, to be fair.
Yeah, he reminds me a lot of Cam, actually. Big up Josh Allen. I'm rooting for him.
He's bigger. When he dives,
he looks like a 7-year-old child, and it looks like someone grew a human body but forgot a head, so they just grew a head of a 7-year-old child and just plonked it on this massive physical specimen.
Do you know what he reminds me of? He reminds me of sort of like when a load of kids like go and play in the park, but there's like someone brings that older brother and they're just like much bigger than everyone else, like still don't have full control of their limbs because they're a child, but just much bigger than everyone else and just diving and like...
Yeah.
Do you know what else he reminds me of? Have you ever read Of Mice and Men?
Yeah. Oh, don't say that name.
George, I saw the ball, George. Great film if anyone hasn't seen it. And book. Did it for my GCSE English, George Kilslaney. Anyway. Spoiler.
Yeah, he didn't know that. Anyway.
My team that won the off-season in terms of coaching changes is the Denver Broncos. And I'll walk you through why. Firstly, their 3 coordinators now sound like 3/4 of the Ninja Turtles. They've got Vic Fangio, Scangarello, and Donatel.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to add the O in there just for the sake of...
it's coming.
Fangio, Scangarello, Donatello, Bronco...
We're just waiting for like Michelangelo now, aren't we?
Yeah, they need to draft a quarterback with the name Michelangelo. They just need to draft someone with the name Michelangelo and put him at quarterback. I don't care what position he plays. He's probably better than Keenum anyway.
I was about to say they've got their franchise quarterback.
Oh God, no, they don't. They've got a bridge quarterback. We'll leave it at that. Fangio, obviously, immense success with the Bears defense this year. Managed to manage some very big personalities, which I think is a really good sign, and B, create a scheme and a defense that maximised every single player's ability and skill on that offense.
Yeah, definitely.
And I don't think the Broncos defense is necessarily as naturally talented as the Bears one is, and it'll be interesting to see how the Bears defense does under Chuck Pagano, who's finally got a job again. But what my favourite part of the Vic Fangio side is when he was asked, how do you see your scheme working alongside this Broncos team? And he said, well, I don't have a scheme. I'm going to evaluate the players. I'm going to look at what they do, and I'm going to tailor a scheme that's built for them. And I think that's that's just pure humility in recognising that not necessarily that your way isn't the right way, but you can't just sit at home and design something and try and push square pegs into round holes.
Yeah.
Say if he was a 4-3 guy at Chicago, wasn't he? That obviously isn't going to work in Denver with players like Von Miller and Bradley Chubb who are stand-up linebackers.
3-4, yeah.
So Fangio is going to go away, create a defense, which shows that he must be an incredible defensive mind if he's able to just kind of create a defensive playbook from scratch. Then, if that's not enough, obviously then he's got his mate Donatello beside him, who I don't really know much about, but who I do know a bit about is this Scangarello? Don't know how to say it. I know a lot about him, but I don't know how to say his name. 49ers quarterback coach has come with glowing, and then offensive coordinator came with glowing references from Kyle Shanahan, who is probably, I know he's faded slightly into the background, but he is the second greatest offensive mind in the NFL, I think, or at least up there in the conversation alongside McVay. What was I saying? Yeah, came with glowing references from Kyle Shanahan, has run a 49ers offense along with Shanahan that has been immensely successful no matter who you put a quarterback, who you put a receiver, just needs a good tight end, which the Broncos don't currently have, but I'm sure they can find one.
Gronkowski.
Imagine. He will get really good stuff out of Keenum, I think. And I think probably the overall message I get from this Broncos coaching staff is we're going to take this team, we're going to make it better. And we're not going to make it better by forcing them to do things a certain way. We're going to look at what they do well and we're going to maximise that. And I just think that's the way to coach nowadays in the NFL.
The thing with Fangio and Donatello is they've actually worked together for a long time. They've worked together since they were in San Francisco. And the interesting thing actually is he is a defensive back secondary coach.
Yeah.
So given that to me is probably their weak point, even though they still have Chris Harris out there.
Well, I mean, pass rush definitively is not their weak point.
No, exactly. So I think bringing in a specialist guy that he's worked with for a long time that he can trust. It's the same thing, I guess, with Chicago. Chicago didn't really have that much of a big name defensive backfield.
No.
And then all of a sudden have one.
Carl Fuller's had a great year. Eddie Jackson's had a great year. Adrian Amos had a great year. Bryce Callahan.
Yeah.
All these players, Prince Amukamara, players who hadn't really either were a bit old and just kind of accepted as all right players, or players who were young and hadn't had their breakout season, had their breakout season under Fangio. And
the thing as well is Fangio is, again, it was a bit like going back to what I was saying about Arians. He's had all this experience, but he's never had a head coaching job. Yeah. And that's not because he's not good enough for it. Clearly is. But I think he comes across as the sort of guy, it's like, but I will do it when I'm ready. And, he's worked with the Bears, obviously a playoff team, and even during their down years, defense has always been the thing that they're good at. He was with the 49ers before they got to the Super Bowl. He's been with the Ravens, they're a championship team, and have always had a great defense. So he has it in him to take Von Miller, who is probably going to go down in history as one of the greatest outside linebackers of all time. The best outside linebacker of all time. Maybe. And then on the other side, he's got a guy who could become one. Yeah. And, it's just...
It's like me, Khalil Mack, Leonard Floyd kind of thing.
I'm walking into the perfect situation. Yeah. And I agree with what you're saying about Keenum. I think all it takes is someone to realise Keenum's great outside the pocket, play action. You've got Philip Lindsay. You have the makings of a really good offense.
Royce Freeman as well.
Kind of maybe need a receiver. Yeah. But other than that,
they need, I reckon, best thing for the Broncos is probably to get themselves a nice receiving tight end, Noah Fant, Iowa State, I think, potentially in the first round to be the Kittle of that offense, and then
Shannon Sharp comes out of retirement.
I wouldn't even put it past him.
Yeah.
It's interesting as well that you've chosen the Bucs, I've chosen the Broncos, and we spoke about Kitchens as well. All three of which kind of buck the trend of young, offensive-minded McVay model coaches. So Arians is obviously about 9,000 years old. Kitchens is also about 9,000 years old, and Fangio is about 10,000 years old. And Fangio is also kind of obviously a defensive coach, not an offensive mind. And I think potentially that might. I don't think it's when you hire like a young, unproven, like a LaFleur that Green Bay have hired. There's no. it's a big risk because you can't measure. There's no history to kind of measure it against. So yes, he could be immensely successful, but he could also be immensely rubbish. Whereas when you hire someone like Fangio, Arians, less so Kitchens because he doesn't really have the resume, but you've seen what they can do in the past. You know at least you'll get that out of them, and then there's scope for more. So there's a lower kind of floor to how good they can be, if that makes sense.
I think it was Eric Mangini that was saying this. It might not have been, but he said this is a trend, and the trend will always change. So right now you've got Sean McVay, who's great. So literally anyone that knows Sean McVay. I mean, hell, Zach Taylor is up for the. He's up for the Bengals job. He's a quarterbacks coach. The only guy I can think of that's gone from being someone that's never been a coordinator to head coach and has success is Andy Reid. He was never a coordinator, but he's been head coach forever. I don't think he's going to be Andy Reid. Okay,
he needs to put on some weight for a start.
So I if I'm the Bengals, I'm like, oh my god, really? Like you're gonna. So I think if Arians works out, if Fangio works out.
Might be a trend of
and
going
if
back
Kitchen
to
works out,
older people.
Yeah, I think that will be the trend again. And then what will happen is someone else will come along in a few years, like a McVay, and be like, "Oh, okay, we need these young guys again."
Yeah.
The alternative to that is if Kingsbury works out.
I think hiring an old guy is actually good in some ways because if they're slightly older, you don't know how long they're going to be coaching for, so they try and make the team good now. Whereas potentially, I think, especially in the current climate of coaches, if you go into somewhere sort of middle-aged and you're like, okay, this is my team, I'm going to build it up. You spend 3 years developing, putting together the pieces you want to make your team. And they're like, oh yeah, you've gone 5 and I can't do the maths.
11.
5 and 11 for the last 3 seasons, or you've gone 8 and 8 for the last 3 seasons. You're cut, and then you're like,
But so
I think you're absolutely right though, because I think that's exactly what's going to happen in Oakland. John Gruden knows he's got a 10-year contract. Even if he doesn't get to coach for 10 years, he's getting paid for 10 years.
Yeah.
So he can do whatever he wants, and he can come up with all those excuses every year. Oh, we didn't have a quarterback this year. Oh, this year we have a new quarterback. Oh, well then, we need traction and everything. And before you know it, he's been coaching for 6 years. So that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And it may work out. So Oakland may in 10, or not 10 years time, in 5 years time be a really great team because they've had all the pieces in time to build it.
I'm going to predict they won't be.
No, I'm not. I think the Oakland Raiders are going to become the new Browns.
Interesting.
And the Browns are going to become the new... I've got...
Chiefs, I think.
Potentially Chiefs.
Perennial contenders, but never quite making it.
I was going to say someone like the Falcons.
You are white. Mark, you always mess up on those things. You're going to say someone like the Falcons?
Yeah.
Okay, let's try again. You are white. It's a good thing we don't get in trouble with Ofcom for speaking over those things. We don't, for the record. Don't panic.
Well, we played it again, so it's fine.
Speaking of coaching changes, let's talk about Mike Tomlin and the Steelers, because there's obviously been this Antonio Brown Skahoodadaddy that's been going on the last few weeks. So for those of you who aren't sure, I think we did speak about it 2 weeks ago briefly. Oh no, we didn't. Antonio Brown currently is a receiver for the Steelers, and in the last game of the year he didn't play, even though it was incredibly important to the Steelers because they needed to win in order to have a chance of making the playoffs. In the end they won, but other results didn't go their way. It then emerged after the game that the reason Antonio Brown didn't play was because he walked out of training on the Wednesday after a bust-up with Ben Roethlisberger. Not like a physical bust-up, but just a massive argument. And then just said he's not going to play, and then just didn't show up to practice, didn't play. It then emerged that this isn't the first time he's just not showing up to practices. He has a history of kind of getting on the Steelers' nerves, to put it lightly. He did a Facebook live stream after the Steelers won a game. Which, from former players apparently violates some kind of locker room sanctity or whatever. He obviously is quite brash and outspoken and has funny haircuts. And since this whole saga has emerged, he's been defending himself on Twitter quite vociferously, arguing against anyone and everyone who gets in his way, including his friend, Emmanuel Sanders.
Which is ironic because Sanders was actually defending him. If you go watch the interview, Sanders was behind him, and Antonio Brown was still like, "No, you're not my friend."
So then, what this has opened up is just a big, it's just revealed massive gaps in the Steelers' organisation and their management of players. The kind of key players in all of this are obviously Tomlin as the coach, Big Ben as the quarterback and kind of de facto leader of the team, Antonio Brown as another leader, not James Conner. Why did I think James Conner? Le'Veon Bell. Who's the fella? James Harrison as well has also come out and said some things. Obviously a long-time Steeler before he retired last year after a brief stint with the Patriots. So I guess the question is, firstly, a new segment for the show. What's going down with Antonio Brown? Where every week we're going to check in and see what Antonio's been up to. And then also, who's at fault for this whole thing? I open the floor.
Do you know who's winning out of all this? Juju Smith-Schuster.
Yeah.
He just needs to keep quiet,
Yeah, he needs to
keep his mouth shut, stay on the sideline, keep making his little Fortnite videos on YouTube. And
Does
then
he make Fortnite videos
yeah,
on YouTube?
man, he's got a really good YouTube channel. If anyone hasn't checked out, I would. He does some quite funny videos. He did a video, he went back to USC, dressed in his full Steelers gear, and just like went to classes and did a full day in the life of a USC student, but in full Steelers gear, including like cleats and a helmet and everything. If Juju just keeps his mouth shut, he's clearly an incredible wide receiver talent. One of my favourite players in the NFL, I've got to say, because he's got personality, but it doesn't kind of flood over into arrogance. And I don't know if that's because he's a humble person or if it's because he's quite young and maybe it will evolve into that. I really hope not.
Or whether it's because just with so many big
names,
attitudes on the team, he's just there like, I can't.
He just seems really chill and funny. I love his celebrations as well. Who wouldn't?
They Fortnite dances.
Well, like the celebrations he does in the end zone. Like last year, he played hide and seek with Le'Veon Bell, all this kind of stuff. And, you know, he's got a big future ahead of him. And especially if Antonio goes, he now becomes number one. And that's a real prove-it chance for a third-year receiver that you often don't get.
I mean, already, sort of, if you look at the Steelers' offense, he's...
Is he going to say it? Are you going to say he's their number one receiver?
I mean, there's a very tempting argument to be made for it. Go on, I'll say it. He's their number one receiver.
Take that, AB.
Well, that's part of what Antonio Brown's argument is.
Yeah, exactly. It's why he's upset.
Big Ben's making more throws to Juju because he doesn't want to throw to Brown. Which, I mean, in fairness, I know Brown is great and everything, and you could have 20 guys on him, which would obviously be illegal, but he'd still catch it. But I think everyone here is at fault. Everyone is at fault. The Rooney family are at fault.
Oh, yeah,
the Steelers for being the Steelers are at fault. The city of Pittsburgh is at fault. Everyone's at fault, if you're asking Antonio Brown.
Emmanuel Sanders is at fault.
But why is it should be no surprise that for the second consecutive year, we have a player... Well, no, actually, no. Third consecutive year, really, because the Bell thing started 2 years ago. James Harrison was kicked out of the building last year, and now this year, we have... Yet another player.
Also have the Martavis Bryant kind of fiasco that's been going on.
The thing with Brown, though, is it reminds me so much of other great receivers before him that it actually comes as no surprise that he is a diva who expects this, that, and the other. If Brown wants to be where he wants to be, he needs to go to a team that is worse than this team, because the problem he has with his team is they are too good. Yeah. And that seems ironic, but because he is not the star, because there are so many talented players on a team that works in so many different ways, he doesn't get what he believes should be his spotlight. Which I find so ironic.
Should he then go to the Broncos if we've already spoken about they need a receiver?
It's Emmanuel Sanders is still at the Broncos, isn't he? So, that could be interesting, the locker room relationship. I think also for Antonio Brown, part of his problem is probably people see his success as a byproduct of Big Ben, whereas... I'm firmly of the belief that Antonio Brown makes Big Ben, but I can understand that a lot of people would think that Big Ben makes Antonio Brown, and because he's been tied to him his entire career, all of his career.
This is what I'll say about that, though, is Roethlisberger has history longer than Brown. So all we have seen is Brown with Roethlisberger.
Yeah.
So I get the argument that maybe Roethlisberger makes Brown. But I would say that Brown has helped extend Roethlisberger's longevity, because 10 years ago, Roethlisberger, great. Very, very, very good. Easily, I'd say, maybe not 10 years ago, but you could see this is a guy that will be a Hall of Famer one day.
Yeah.
And he's still playing that way. And he will play this way next year when he has Smith-Schuster, because he is that good.
And he has that Steelers O-line, and he has two more than serviceable tight ends, and he has an incredible run game to back him up.
And I have an incredible scheme that can get anyone running for however many yards.
The big problem ultimately is this is far too public. Yeah. Roethlisberger comes out and says things he shouldn't say because you are the leader. You should not be saying these things. You should be backing your you're backing your friends in public, and then you take it to the locker room because that's the way it goes, right? Tomlin has been an inadequate leader of men. He is a great coach, but an inadequate leader of men because he has allowed this to happen, and he has created a culture where his quarterback can come out and say things that he shouldn't be saying. His receiver can have a voice too. Too many guys having a voice. If you go to New England, one guy has a voice. That's it. Even Brady can't really
Brady
come out and
spoke
say
to
stuff.
the media and said, we suck. That was huge because Brady never says anything like that because that's Belichick's remit to kind of shut the media down and just keep everything focused on New England. And I think you're right that the leaders in the Steelers are to blame. It's interesting. I can't remember who said this. I think it might have been Shannon Sharp that the two leaders of that Steelers, or the two players who are put in leadership positions, Big Ben and Antonio Brown, happen to be probably two of the worst leaders in the NFL. Big Ben is a self-obsessed he just is self-obsessed, and Big Ben's policy after every kind of conflict on his team is to come out and play the nice guy card. I texted him and he didn't reply. I called him and he didn't reply. I left him a voicemail, he didn't reply. He says it every single time. He said it with Harrison, he said it with Bell, he said it with Brown. I'm not being funny, Ben. Maybe they just don't want to speak to you because of the way you treat them the rest of the time. He sets the tone for that team. And when the O-line came out and kind of dissed Le'Veon Bell, I'm sure that was not because Big Ben told them to directly. I'm sure he didn't force them to make those Instagram comments. But if Big Ben is constantly bad-mouthing Le'Veon in the locker room, obviously you're going to follow your lead like that, especially one who's as respected as Big Ben, who's been in the league, 16 years? 14 years. Yeah. He shouldn't be acting like a 7-year-old petulant child, which seems to be his constant mindset. He's had 5,000 years, which he's going to use to negotiate probably another 5 years in the NFL. That 5,000 yards for me, sorry, not years. That 5,000 yards...
I thought you were just exaggerating.
Is wholly due to having... Well, not wholly, but in large part due to having Antonio Brown on one side, Juju on the other, both 1,000-yard receivers. I can't list any other teams off the top of my head that had two 1,000-yard receivers this year. He has two incredible receiving tight ends. He has Connor, who's proven to be as much of a receiving threat as Le'Veon was, if not more of a receiving threat. He has probably, I think, the most underrated and best O-line in the league, maybe alongside the Rams. He has a defense that constantly gets turnovers and wins him the ball back. He's got Tomlin coaching the whole team, who sets, in terms of kind of game planning and play style, sets an incredible tone for the team. Big Ben has it all made for him, and he's still acting like a spoilt brat. It makes me really angry. I think what the Steelers need to do to move on from this, they stick with Tomlin, because Tomlin's been there for 12 years. Yeah. Tomlin's still young. Tomlin's still got a great coaching career ahead of him, and what the Steelers have historically done is stuck with their coaches, and that's the right thing to do here. You need to stick with Tomlin. You need to cut Big Ben, or trade him, or do anything. Get him out of there, because he's cancer in that locker room. He's not helping your team anymore. Whatever he produces on the field cannot justify the way he acts kind of as a leader of the team. He's not a leader. You probably realistically at this stage need to get rid of Antonio Brown as well. I know it's going to be a big cap hit. You probably shouldn't have given him that contract. But again, it's not going to be productive and conducive to your team spirit. You can find another receiver. You're the Steelers. You always manage to do this. You need to let Tomlin start again. You need to get a young quarterback in who Tomlin can be impressionable on and say, look, we're starting a new team culture starting today. I am the boss. What I say goes, and you all are going to follow it. And that way you can avoid any of these kind of fallouts which seem to plague the Steelers year after year after year.
Here's the problem for the Steelers, though. Who do they have waiting to take over Big Ben's role? Because historically, quarterbacks, great quarterbacks have been traded. I mean, hell, they traded Montana. But it's because they had Steve Young, and then Steve Young went on to become a Hall of Famer too.
So they drafted a quarterback then?
I don't know what the answer is, but what I do know is whether it's Haskins, whether it's Mason Rudolph, none of them are Steve Young. So my point is, it's hard to make that decision. It's easy to make the Brown decision for me. You get rid of him. Yeah. I don't care what money says, because you don't have anyone else to pay anyway.
And you've got Juju in the wings.
Yeah, and you've got guys like James Washington, Ryan Switzer. There are guys there. They'll be fine. You don't move on from Big Ben so long as you can keep him. Why? Because he is still productive, and ultimately, who do you have that can give you that production too? Rudolph might not turn over the ball as much as he does, but do you think Rudolph is going to be a 5,000-yard passer? I don't.
I think the best solution is Rudolph on the field and Will Ferrell in the in the interviews, because he looks like Big Ben and he can trick everyone, and he's probably a lot more docile.
Right, anyway, that is it.
In terms of what's going down with Antonio Brown, he tweeted this morning or last night, I think, something along the lines of, business is open.
Yes.
In reference to his business is booming.
He did, but he also... who was it that responded to it? Gruden.
Was it fake Gruden, though?
I don't know which Gruden it was.
I think it was fake Gruden.
But, no. Gruden has done an interview because I saw... there was a whole story about it saying Gruden has now positioned himself to become a player in this. Whether or not they intend to take him, he has come out and said something along the lines of, he would be an interesting choice for us. And it wouldn't surprise me because it makes sense. It's like what I was saying about Terrell Owens a couple of weeks ago. Terrell Owens went around all these teams, the Bengals, the Bills. Terrell Owens had no business being on those teams because Terrell Owens is too good, or was too good, for teams that were never going to win. But it's because he could go to those teams and then he could get paid. Which is funny because they couldn't pay Khalil Mack. They couldn't pay Amari Cooper. But they can sure as hell pay Antonio Brown.
Antonio Brown is better than Amari Cooper, though.
He is, but it's going to be...
He's not better than Khalil Mack.
True.
And I know they play a different position, but Khalil Mack...
more valuable.
Yeah.
Another drama striking the NFL is the Carson Wentz situation.
This is hilarious to me.
Yeah, so a report came out in the last week that basically Carson Wentz, obviously quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles, who was injured last year, and Nick Foles took over and led them to the Super Bowl, and then got injured again this year, and Nick Foles led them to the playoffs, and ultimately lost to the Saints. A report came out that said certain sources in the locker room are not happy with Carson Wentz as their leader and basically want Nick Foles back, long story short, which has been... I can't think of the word off the top of my head, but essentially shut down by Fletcher Cox and Malcolm Jenkins are the two that I've seen. I'm sure others have probably come out and said something.
Do you know who the first one was to come out and say something?
What?
Zach Ertz.
Of course.
Yeah.
Wentz's best friend.
Yeah.
So, it seems like a bit of a non-story, but it does open an interesting debate of... I know it's probably academic at this stage, but would the Eagles be better off sticking with Nick Foles?
This is why this story is out there. Because Nick Foles gives more receivers a chance. Because apparently the whole problem started when Wentz came back this year and they were trying to get Wentz to play the Foles system, which meant you were spreading the ball out a lot more. And apparently one of the problems was Wentz was ignoring the calls on the field and he was deciding to cut running plays in favor of passing to Ertz, of all people. And obviously guys like Aguilar, Jeffrey and whatnot, who were there during the Foles rise and were getting a lot more receptions, a lot more... I don't think it's about them getting the spotlight. I think what it's about is... Recognition. Wentz apparently has been annoying his offensive line because they're doing a really hard job of setting up the run that then gets cancelled on the field last minute because he wants to pass it to Ertz.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me that players would feel this way, but it is great timing knowing that this is exactly the time that the Eagles need to start thinking about what to do with Foles. Do you sign him and trade him? Do you sign him and keep him? Do you just let go of him?
Tag him and trade him.
But now you know that you have players in your locker room that aren't happy with your potential 15 years of the future.
I think it's likely that the sources, inverted commas, who this has come from are low-level players, like fringe players who are either unhappy with their playing time or, yada, 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 and just having a grumble. I don't necessarily think, it wasn't Alshon Jeffrey, let's say that for sure, but I do see what you're saying. Jeffrey shines a lot more when Foles is the quarterback, and it's not because Foles is a better quarterback, it's just because Wentz seems to always look to Ertz, and that's not why Ertz is successful, but it played a large factor in Ertz's kind of rise. Personally, I've always been on Carson Wentz's side. I think obviously he gives you a lot more. People seem to forget that he was an MVP candidate before he broke his tore his ACL last year. Still threw a touchdown pass with that torn ACL. He just gives you so much more than Foles, even notwithstanding the fact that he's so much younger. And I think Foles is a better system quarterback, and what I mean by that is Foles is able to play systems better than Wentz is, and I think that just comes from experience and the fact that Foles has been in a lot of different systems and gone to, might not have been different teams necessarily, but different systems and different coaches and things like that. But yeah, it's interesting that this has even come out, and I think it probably might be a bit of a wake-up call for Carson Wentz, even just kind of subconsciously in the back of his mind, that he has to start kind of fulfilling his role as not only the leader of the franchise, but just the leader of the team, and make sure that he does have everyone on side, like Foles seems to be magically able to do.
I think we could have a full debate about Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. But I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that he's been injured 2 years in a row.
And he was injured at college.
And I mean, you're not always going to have Nick Foles as your backup. You're not always going to have that great backup, whereas Nick Foles has shown to have great productivity. And he clearly seems to rally the team behind him. Yeah. Even if some players rally behind, or there are probably some experienced players who rally behind Carson Wentz because they know that next year, if Carson Wentz is the starter and they didn't rally behind him, then there'll be that tension in the locker room. So I think that was, regardless of what they think of him, that is a very sensible and mature thing to do, because it basically kind of patches over that wound next year. But yeah, I think, although as exciting as Carson Wentz is, I think you've got to go with the guy that wins games. You've got to go with the guy that is going to be there all season. I think that although Nick Foles almost doesn't make sense in a lot of ways because Carson Wentz is more exciting, I think
and cheap.
He won't be cheap.
Well, he is at the moment.
He is, but they have to re-sign him this year or lose him. And they have to pay him money, because if they don't pay him the money that other teams will, he will not be there. I think the big thing that gets missed out of this, though, is this is a situation that has never happened before.
Yeah.
We've never had a guy have an MVP year, go down injured, and his backup go and win a Super Bowl for him instead.
And get MVP.
Exactly. But then we've never had it where the next year, the guy gets injured again, the guy comes back and wins more games. He's only lost one game as an Eagle the last 2 years. And that was that cruddy 6-0 loss to Dallas.
And also the Saints game.
But up until that point, that's what I'm saying. Like,
so he's lost 2.
He's lost 2. He's like 7-2, and that includes 2 of the best back-to-back playoff performances by a quarterback ever, and that's just not debatable. The thing is, though, is what else is Carson Wentz expect to feel? Because you were drafted with the, I guess, promise that this is your team for the next 15 years, and then you almost get to the promised land, and because you went down hurt, you know what being hurt means, because if you're hurt, then the guys aren't going to be rallying around you because availability is the best.
It's a tricky situation.
Of course he's going to come in and think, well, we're not going to do things his way because, it's me. And that, of course, will come across as selfish. But I don't think it's selfish. I don't think I think it's him
probably
thinking,
insecurity.
Damn, all of a sudden it went from being mine to not.
He's probably trying to distinguish himself from Foles in a lot of ways, because if he doesn't make that system his own and prove what value he can add to that system, then that's an argument in favour of Foles. Yes, we're running out of time, but I do briefly want to touch on the NFL UK games were announced this week, which obviously is huge for us in the NFL UK scene. 4 games, I think. I could get them up, but I can't really be bothered. There's only one that I'm really interested in, which is Panthers at Bucks. The stadium hasn't been announced, the date hasn't been announced, yada yada, all these details. We have to go, the 3 of us.
Oh, that means that I'm going to be going to 2 games because.
Oh, you're going to which one?
Rams.
Oh, Rams playing.
Yeah, Rams are coming to London as well. That's what I thought you were building up to, but I didn't realise.
What? The Panthers and Bucks, man. I mean, that's huge. This is the first time the Panthers have played in London.
I mean, definitely for the show, that's a bigger game, given that it's 2 of your teams rather than
we could.
I actually think it's a really big game because it's a division game.
Yeah.
I can't believe they've taken a division game out of the States, to be honest.
It's super exciting.
Don't you want to see the reigning Super Bowl champions play?
Oh, come on.
But New England aren't coming over next year.
Oh.
We obviously the show has an expiry date in its current format, where we're all going to be leaving university in summer. Unfortunately,
I'm not.
Well, yeah.
I'm going to be here.
Congrats.
No, I'm just going to be here forever. Like, I'll be doing a show here in 20 years' time.
Me and Mark will hopefully be based in Leeds, which is obviously relatively close to York. Yeah. So hopefully we'll be able to try and figure something out, but it won't be this kind of regular 2 times a week content that you guys are seeing now, unfortunately. But what we can do is hopefully these NFL UK games could be a nice rallying point for us. Get some more content out there for you guys. Get some more time spent with each other for us 3 in a really like flipping exciting environment. I'm going to do any. I don't care how much tickets are. I'm going.
Okay, here are the games: Rams, Bengals, Bears,
Boring.
Raiders,
Boring.
Texans, Jaguars,
Boring.
Panthers, Bucks.
Interesting.
I tell you what,
it's a weird lineup, isn't it?
It is strange, but it's
interesting that the Rams-Bengals game is there because obviously the Rams quarterback coach is tipped to become the Bengals new head coach. That's kind of McVay versus McVay Jr. in a sense.
Yeah, obviously the Panthers, they don't know what their situation looks like next year too.
Panthers could be doo-doo.
Awful.
Yeah, they could be, and probably still beat Tampa. Because I've seen Tampa in London before when they played New England, and that was it was like the St. Valentine's Day massacre.
I mean, I started supporting the Rams after seeing them lose like 42 or 45-7 to the Patriots. So,
what is that? So you only started supporting the Rams this weekend, or? I just can't describe to you the excitement I feel just at the very concept of being in the same city as Cam Newton and seeing Cam. Like, I know it's a bit cringe, but man, I love that guy. And like, imagine just seeing him in person. That's something special. That really is. God, I'm so excited.
Oh, it's like a classic love story. Man loves man.
Other man
classic
doesn't.
that is. Yeah.
Wait.
One of my favourites. Man loves man. We, of course, push a pro-gay rights agenda on this show.
We'll end the story there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think any of the other NFL UK games really stand out beyond
Not
that
really.
Bucks Panthers one. I guess the Rams Bengals might have a nice storyline to it. Bears Raiders.
Khalil Mack is going to.
I suppose, yeah, that's
is
true.
going
They can really market Mack.
He might sack Gruden. He might sack Gruden. Yeah.
Just like Gruden sacked him.
Yeah.
And then what's the last one? Jaguars Texans. I guess it could be interesting if the Jags come back
And get a quarterback.
Yeah, if they cut on it.
And also, Jags are always good because like London is their second home.
Yeah.
So,
which, you know, shout out to the Jags for everything they're doing for the NFL UK scene, and just shout out for the NFL UK games in general because it worked really well. And there's obviously a game in Mexico next year, isn't there? Which was my panic because obviously the Panthers have only ever played in America.
Yeah.
And it was kind of accepted that they would play overseas this year, I think, and I was stressing that it would be Mexico, but I can't describe to you my excitement.
So all three of our
thing.
teams are coming over.
Yeah. Well, we will try and make it to both the games,
convenient.
I think. And we'll have to obviously look at tickets and stuff like that. Yada yada yada. I mean, we could just buy like one of them season tickets and go to every single one. What? No.
That'd be expensive.
It would be
especially if you
expensive.
consider transport to London.
Yeah, true. But anyway, that's kind of all we have time for this week. Other thing I just want to quickly say is Larry Fitzgerald is back for another year. Yay! Big up Fitz, we love you. Keep doing you. We will be back on Tuesday with a really interesting show on dynasties. I think that's the plan. Similar to the one we did last year. Thank you all very much for listening. And then obviously Super Bowl content will be coming next week as well as a live show. All the best. See you later. Goodbye.